Hello everyone and welcome to the IFST Sensory Science Group webinar, Putting the Sensor in Sensory, Engineering New Understanding and Consumer Experiences. My name is Stephanie Mitchell. I'm the chair of the IFST Sensory Science Special Interest Group. The group allows members interested in sensory science to engage and share knowledge with fellow professionals. We cover a wide range of topics relating to the sensory properties of food and drink, including sensory testing and analysis, consumer trends, neuroscience, the impact of social networking, and health and wellness. We are also involved in accreditation and examination of sensory training, and the review and promotion of ethical and professional standards. This webinar is part of a series replacing our planned June conference, which has been cancelled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Please keep an eye on the IFST's event page for more details of the next webinar. Feel free to make comments and ask questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A function, which should be at the bottom of your screen. There will be a Q&A session after the presentation where we will respond to as many of these questions as possible. Natasha Medhurst, Scientific Affairs Manager at IFST, will be asking these questions. So we have 3 speakers today for you, all from Cambridge Design Partnership. Ben Strutt is one of the directors, and he is Design and Front-End Innovation. We have Alison Hart, a data scientist, and Martha Hodgson, who is Market and Design Insights Researcher. For more information about the company, please have a look at the IFST's website. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Ben.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. It's fantastic to have the chance to speak with you all remotely today, even if during this unprecedented period my physical self has been superseded by digital me. Perhaps this is a timely metaphor. It's extraordinary to reflect on just how much enabling technology we're now reliant on in our everyday lives. Really, it's the advent of digital that has enabled the world to carry on with some semblance of relative normality during the COVID period, something that simply may not have been possible even a few decades ago. As an R&D and design consulting partner, technology is of course central to our work, and this provided a convenient springboard for the theme of our talk today, putting the sensor in sensory, engineering new understanding and consumer experiences. My name is Ben Strutt. I would describe myself as an insatiably curious industrial designer, and I now lead CDP's design and front-end innovation teams, which includes our consumer and healthcare insights research capability and our sensory engineering services. Martha and Alison will introduce themselves shortly. While, or perhaps because we aren't a food technology or even a classic sensory sciences business, this slide shows just a few of the products and technology developments we've supported over recent years, it's a privilege to have the chance to connect with members and guests of the IFST. However, we very much hope that some of our perspectives on sensory and, as the title suggests, the value of data and sensors will resonate with you and some of your own innovation challenges. For those who aren't familiar with Cambridge Design Partnership, or CDP as we tend to call ourselves, we're a turnkey innovation partner offering clients ad hoc or, in many cases, end-to-end innovation support ranging from earliest research insight and strategy through concept and technology development to transfer to manufacture. Over 150 specialists, including designers, researchers, scientists and engineers, work across 8 market sectors out of offices in Cambridge, UK and Raleigh, North Carolina. If you were to come and visit our R&D centres, and you are warmly welcome to when the world gets physical again, you would see our team working in a very applied, very human-centred way, co-creating with consumers, developing new technologies, experimenting in one of our many labs, testing models and prototypes, and eventually supporting scale-up ahead of market launch. Our work is broadly split equally across the consumer subsectors, which encompasses everything from food and beverage packaging to beauty and personal care to vending systems, and healthcare, which ranges from drug delivery devices to surgical systems like this cutting-edge, literally, single-port access robot which enables improved outcomes for complex access surgeries on the right of the image. But before some of you begin to think you've tuned into the wrong webinar, the first insight we wanted to share is how much of a creative benefit it is to work across so many market sectors, such a broad solution space. It gives us an extraordinary opportunity to cross-fertilize technologies, market insights, materials, processes, business models, and design solutions to help reimagine new futures. It's interesting to reflect on the steady march of the bias of value sitting within a product towards a horizon where much of the value sits in the services and the relationships and the equities that are created by those services sitting around the product. We feel this shift presents incredible opportunity for many brand owners, and while the physicality of food will never go away, businesses that aren't beginning to plan their digital transformation and service strategies right now may well get left behind. And so our aim is not to focus exclusively on food science and technology, or even claim to be experts in the field in which many of you are, but to demonstrate the value we gain from drawing stimulus from other categories and industries and the many ways in which technology and good design can complement the food science experience. We hope that some of the things we talk about might spark new trains of thought or even new ideas for research approaches or product experiences or business models that you can continue to explore through the lenses of your own interest areas and categories. So over the next 25 minutes or so, we're going to cover three theme areas. First, the role that sensors play in some of our insights work. Second, a closer focus on the value data science can offer. And third, a reflection on how important it is to close the loop, eliciting that value from the noise and translating it into human, preferably multisensory experiences. And so to our first theme, using technology to better understand consumer experience. There are a range of methods, tools, and techniques that innovators can use to learn about people's real-world interactions and habits. We've carried out traditional qual and quant market and consumer insights research for many years, and still do, to inform our innovation recommendations and strategies. But a pivot point was a research inquiry we carried out about 4 years ago. We were working with a client who was keen to understand the consumer relationship with their product, in particular the compliance to their recommended use regimen, one in which only regular use would deliver the claimed benefits. How to drive end-user compliance and how to maintain it is a challenge faced by many industries. If brands can achieve this goal, their product will more likely deliver better experiences. That delivers a better ability to make claims and, of course, the repeat business and brand and consumer loyalty that we're all after. A key part of the research protocol was a diary study, but anyone who's worked in research knows that diaries can be very subjective. Consumers don't always say what they did. Often it's not even conscious. It's not that participants are being difficult or evasive. Sometimes a user is just unaware of a certain behaviour. The demands of a busy lifestyle get in the way of completing the diary. Maybe it's a sensitive or taboo topic and it's a bit embarrassing to say what really happened. As innovators, these inaccuracies are not only frustrating, but they actually risk misdirecting our focus. We got this particular set of diaries back and were immediately skeptical about the information we'd received. Some of the entries just didn't stack up. And it set us wondering if we could improve the quality of the data and the insight we were getting by using technology. We considered life logging cameras, also known as PIC or portable image capture technology. These things automatically take a photo every 30 seconds for the duration of a consumer study. Some say a big benefit for market research. Now, don't get me wrong, I think this tech could generate some really cool imagery, especially in extreme scenarios where hands-free operation is critical, such as preparation of raw meat, homeschooling 2 young children during a global pandemic. But as someone who's spent a lot of time decoding consumer needs and translating them into specifications, there's a problem. There are 2,880 chunks of 30 seconds in a 24-hour period. That's 2,880 photos that a researcher has to wade through without any context whatsoever to point at what may or may not be an insight, or the chance to dig deeper if one emerges. So we sat down with our software and electronics team and started to brainstorm. The result, and I'm fast-tracking here, was the development of a miniaturized suite of sensors that can be embedded in devices and packaging over extended field trials to help better understand normal behaviors. It's being used in both current products, here in an injector pen on the left, but also prototypes for new devices ranging from small domestic appliances through to food and drink packaging. This helps us understand behaviors over extended periods and in healthcare, critically, to validate use adherence as part of helping understand drug trial performance. We call the technology and the service that supports it Dialogue. The sensor and power suite is bespoke to each inquiry, the spec depending on the nature and length of the trial, but it can, for example, measure passive and active duration of use, full XYZ orientation, shock loading, temperature, humidity, and a range of other factors. The technology was used by Avon in pre-launch trials of a new prototype night cream and packaging concept. The technical insight was that skin adapts to the same formulation over time, and so it appears to become less efficacious. The idea was to create 2 different night creams in a double-ended container to be rotated by the user every 7 days to avoid disadaptation. But there are unquantified risks attached to the concept. Would the user remember when they last rotated? When to next rotate? Would one end run out long before the other end, leading to a dissatisfactory experience? So we developed a dedicated sensor array, created the prototypes, and supported a 4-week product placement study. We haven't time now to go into the detail, but if you'd like to understand more about the process of developing, embedding, testing, fielding, and interpreting data from this sort of research, I'd encourage you to reach out directly. Our details will be at the end. The outcome of the study was a series of pivotal insights highlighting both the inconsistencies and consistencies between dataset and written diaries, what the research participants said and what they did, and more importantly, in the unreported activities. These insights set off a series of new creative directions for Avon for additional communication strategies and services, and ultimately helped reduce launch risk. The product has been incredibly successful for Avon in market. The insights that have come out of these dialogue projects have in some cases been extraordinary. In one study, 4 out of 10 users stopped using a device within 3 weeks. In another, 3/4 of research participants failed to follow every step of the instructions for use. In another, we were surprised to see how much shock loading a product was subjected to, and we're frequently surprised by the range and duration of use. Dialogue finds a natural home in formative consumer insights applications and in validation of healthcare device trials, something Alison's going to talk more about in a moment. However, the insight from connected data logging equipment can also be used to support enhanced B2B applications, both in that pre-launch exploration phase as well as to streamline commercial operations and supply chain. A key point is that streamlining commercial operations doesn't have to be at the cost of consumer experience. In fact, in many cases, it can actually offer the opposite, reinforcing the quality and consistency of the end user experience. We supported Unilever in the creation of their My Cornetto premium soft ice vending appliance. It was an incredibly exciting project. The killer value proposition was to address the inconsistency of ice cream product architecture, not to mention the preparation time and food hygiene issues that can sometimes be associated with soft ice from a kiosk or van. It was also to move the serving of a premium ice cream out of the freezer cabinet and into a consumer-facing experience more akin to a barista serving coffee, but which behind the scenes was plug and play for an operator. This was no small design and engineering feat. It required extensive multi-disciplinary collaboration to achieve innovation in formulation, vending appliance systems, packaging, and product design. It was also a fantastic data analytics platform. We created 50 CE marked, fully IoT enabled prototype appliances that went into trial for months all over Europe. By making machines fully connected and creating a live client operations dashboard, valuable data sets could be generated which could support experimental research ranging from flavors, impact of regional marketing campaigns, optimization of stock control, and even understanding correlation of sell-through to season, geography, and weather. I focused on the value of sensors in typically small-scale exploratory formative research. In the next section, Alison is going to talk more about data science and how data sets can be mined to further enhance real-time user understanding, create new business opportunity, and enhanced experiences. Alison.
Thank you, Ben. My name is Alison Hart. I'm a consultant data scientist at CDP. My PhD was in applied mathematics, and I've spent over 6 years developing algorithms specifically for sensors and sensor systems, covering consumer and medical applications. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the technical side of things and how you move from just having data to getting an enhanced understanding from that data. Now, a lot of these opportunities have been enabled by the data and sensor revolution. If you think about the last several years, there's been a huge increase in connectivity, the Internet of Things, but also in the availability of low-powered, low-cost sensors. Sensors are everywhere. They're in all our pockets, in our phones, but they can also be run on a very small battery and return data remotely. This means you can now put sensors in places that wouldn't previously have been cost effective to do so, and monitor things that previously couldn't be measured in operation. For example, you can monitor the temperature and humidity of individual boxes during shipping. Gas sensors have been used to track the volatile organic compounds given off by perishable food in an attempt to monitor the quality or the level of ripeness during transit. Smart labelling even allows sensors to be embedded within packaging. Even without those embedded sensors, you can use the fact that most people have a camera on them to pass more information on to the consumers, so data on ingredients or the supply chain, just by introducing QR codes onto products. We've already talked about how data is not enough. It needs to be processed and understood to be of use. And with the growth of data, there's been a corresponding growth in data science. So the tools and techniques needed to analyse all the data and actually extract value from it. In particular, for these applications, I'm going to talk about today the growth of sensor fusion techniques, so that the data from a number of sensors can be pulled together and combined to give better and more reliable insights. Both of these are obviously vital, but the third thing you do need is someone to interpret this into a business context, to take the new information and work out how it can be utilised and what the consumer need is. So in order to really make the most of your data, you need all three: the right data, the right skills and tools, but the right business understanding to translate it into something useful. And if you can get all that right, data is an incredibly powerful tool. At which point I'd like to run through a couple of different case studies covering some of the examples of the major themes in data science using sensors. This example is all about proving the benefits of a product and monitoring user compliance remotely. Now, I know it isn't directly relevant to the food industry, but the same principle of delivering a consistent consumer experience is transferable, and it can be useful to look at what's happening in adjacent fields and adapt techniques to your own needs. This case study uses CDP's dialogue system introduced by Ben earlier, but here it's being scaled up from a research tool into a more precise application to monitor a dry asthma inhaler. So we're all familiar with inhalers. They're a common way to administer drugs, but their efficiency is dependent on how the user inhales and uses the device. So the problem in a drugs trial is, how do you know if the drug was taken correctly? The results of a study can be really confused if users don't comply with instructions. So if you give people an inhaler in an interview environment, they'll try and follow the instructions. In this case, that's remembering to open it up and put in a little capsule of drug, to push the buttons on the side to pierce the capsule, and then they'll hold it at 90 degrees and breathe in. However, once they're not at home, people don't tend to be as careful, or they forget to take it, or they miss out a step. So the data you get in an interview doesn't give you the real picture. With this system, we had a tiny dialogue logging device embedded in the base of the inhaler. It's very light, people forget it's there. What this meant is you can monitor an individual user's interaction with the device in a much more natural environment. You don't need to actually be there observing them as they use it, because you can reconstruct how they interacted with the inhaler later on. In the case of this inhaler, we could get a massive amount of information about how the device was used by using sensor fusion. We could see the main chamber was open, so the device was in use. We could check the capsule had been inserted and the chamber correctly closed. We could tell if the capsule had been pierced prior to use. Then we could tell what angle the device was held at. As the drug was being taken, we could record the inhalation profile to see how deep a breath was taken, if the capsule was spinning to release the drug. We could even measure the dose of the drug released and confirm the capsule had been emptied. So by analysing each of the sensors, the accelerometer, gyroscope, pressure, we could get a part of that picture, but by combining all of the information together, you get a much more certain view of what's been happening. The first benefit of this is compliance. You can tell if it's been used, when it's been used, if it's been used correctly. So for a drug company, this is really helpful, as they can legitimately exclude data from a study. This user can't show the benefit of our drug because they didn't take the drug correctly. The other application is education. You can actually help the user to improve their technique and engage with them to get the full benefit. If they're not complying, you can explain exactly what they're doing wrong and how to improve. Potentially, you could even do this in real time with an app. So better training, better outcomes. Quanti was about monitoring an individual user. This example is much more about enabling mass personalisation. So Coca-Cola Freestyle machines are a fantastic example of data gathering and customer understanding on a far bigger scale. In case you've not heard of these, this is a device that fits into the usual vending machine footprint, but contains very concentrated ingredients and some complex microfluidics to allow it to dispense 150 plus flavours. It allows customers to select from the whole Coca-Cola family of drinks. Now, if this was just a monitored vending machine, that would already give great insight by providing accurate information on customer preference and usage pattern down to a very local store scale. The big thing with Freestyle is it allows the customer to combine and customize those flavors, allowing mass customization with all of that data flowing straight back to Coke. So not only are we talking about precise stock control and records of machine use, but the richness of customer data enables a much deeper understanding of what customers want. And after 8 years of gathering data, in 2017, Coke announced it was launching Cherry Sprite, a new pre-mixed bottled flavour based purely on data they'd got from the Freestyle machines, confident it would be a success. And they can do so much more. They can launch very targeted themed drinks for movie tie-ins or local sporting events, and they can explore flavour preferences across each country they operate in. This is an incredibly rich data set. Coke have openly spoken about their belief in AI and one of the first big global brands to invest in its potential. So the data they have from Freestyle and the associated app, as well as their other AI projects they've talked about in the public domain, such as their use of social media monitoring, spotting what's being uploaded about the brand, and their clever targeting of adverts, I think we're bound to see a lot more innovation coming from this in the future. Now, staying on the theme of personalisation, Coke allowed customers to select to mix their own drinks from a predefined list. This next case study is some work we did for Echo, the shoe manufacturer, which was much more about delivering an individual tailored experience. So a Coke was about the novelty and the theatre of the experience. This is about a real durable personal benefit. What we developed is Echo's QuantU service, a footwear customisation service that uses data to deliver individual foot comfort. And it does this using two things: a scanner to precisely measure foot dimensions, and a set of sensors embedded in a shoe to detect exactly how a person walks in practice. The sensors can measure things like where the pressure is located across the foot, how the foot strikes the ground, and the temperature and humidity within the shoe, which is important for customer comfort. All this information is combined to specify a unique insole designed to give maximum support, comfort, and ventilation based on an individual's measurements. So then Eco can 3D print this insole in silicon within 2 hours. So they're using the advances in 3D printing and data science to deliver mass personalisation, but on a very individual scale, combining it with a very personal, special experience. They're no longer just delivering the product, they're delivering a service. Now, this is a very exciting field, and there's a lot more that can be done. But what all these examples have in common is there was a clear purpose behind them. There's a lot of hype about big data and AI at the moment, and it's very easy to get caught up in the technology and not think about the actual benefit that's being delivered. It's important to maintain a focus on how to activate value from the data. And with that, I'll pass over to Martha.
Thank you, Alison. I'm Martha Hodgson, and a little about me before we dive in. I'm a designer by background and have been focused for the last 8 years or so on design, market, trend, and user insights research. My passion is to ensure innovations, be them product or service, are truly consumer-centric, and how true insights can be uncovered and translated into meaningful action. So I am therefore delighted to be sharing with you the final section of our presentation, which is focusing on that all-important question: how do you translate understanding into actual human experiences? I can appreciate that a large part of the audience today is likely to be focused on food and drink, and as you may have established from the range of examples and case studies Alison and Ben have walked us through, we are not a pure food and drink agency. However, a lot of what we do complements food and drink, as a lot of the sensory work we do is in packaging. Many of you will be used to working with traditional sensory panels and protocols, where value is gained from the consistency of a sensory panel's ability to objectively parameterize. But when the aim isn't to purely objectively parameterize flavors and fragrances, but to elicit a different response and understand what changes need to be made to achieve this, being a design agency, we have found some quite interesting results of working and co-creating with consumers and sensory panels to look at the enhancements that can be created. So to start this last section, I'd like to take a few minutes just sharing with you a little bit about our 8-step systematic sensory research and development process that can be used to enhance consumer product experiences through device and packaging enhancements. And just for context, this case study has been built around defining the packaging specifications for a spreads brand. Consumer-centric design is very much at the heart of everything we do. So typically, when we begin any piece of sensory work, our insight and design team undertake a piece of contextual, qualitative research using in-home ethnography and observational techniques to understand all the touch points and attributes that are important or associated with the current contextual experience. Collaboratively, our insights and design team will then interpret the richness of the research by identifying and connecting key themes and parameterizing the findings. This helps us to start defining our design or our creative operating envelope. A stimulus toolkit will then be created using both existing packaging and new concepts to elicit further insights from consumers. As highlighted by Ben earlier with the My Cornetto example, having a multidisciplinary perspective is key. So here we will liaise with our clients' food science teams and with expert sensory science partners to understand what is possible from a formulation perspective. This is really important to ensure that the formulation and the packaging or the delivery system will work together. Having collaboratively built the stimulus, our research and design teams will elicit further consumer insights through a range of exploratory and co-creative mapping activities. As you can imagine, following this step, we'll go through another design loop to reiterate those insights, which then help to define our design specifications and the concepts which we will then prototype. So then, step 5, as a very hands-on business, we are into prototyping and machining, and of course, bringing data and data science into this. We create CAD imagery and CAD models that bring these concepts to life, both driving our in-house machinery that creates the mold masters and the 3D printers that create the prototypes. The example I'm showing here is one of our CNC machines cutting out the mold master for a thin-walled spreads lid. Once we have the prototypes, we can start putting it into pieces of our lab testing equipment to ensure they represent the intended visual, acoustic, and haptic experiences. Shown here is our tensile tester, where we are looking at the strain or the stiffness of the spreads lid. Having defined the structure, once again, data science gives us the ability to understand the parametric model. So it's fed into the milling machine, it appears on the screen, and it allows us to simulate things like mold flow. This all helps take the guesswork out of the development by mechanically parameterizing the device or the packaging. And finally, we then test and validate the prototypes with consumers, correlating those parameters with real consumer perceptions and experience. So through CDP's experience of helping to engineer new understandings and consumer experiences using this process across multiple sectors, we have extracted 3 key principles we would like to share with you for how to translate data-led insights into something meaningful and useful, which actually align quite well with our proven model for innovation shown here on the right. Firstly, to give you a quick overview, involve the consumers early to ensure that you translate data-led insights into meaningful and desirable experiences. Secondly, adapt to a service-based world. The new millennium has seen this transformation from a product-based to a more service-based world, where many experiences are migrating from product to services through digital. Essentially, those who succeed will adapt to do this. And finally, utilize feasible technology solutions to capture true parameters so you can design for who consumers really are. Let me dive into each one of these a little more. Involve the consumers early. Involve the consumers precisely because they are not trained panelists. It can be extremely enlightening to involve consumers in exploratory, formative research rather than just for validation of what sensory panels have advised or specified. Involving them early can lead to unforeseen moments where new connections are made, leading to new value propositions and opportunities for brand extensions. It can also lead to surprising revelations that highlight some limitations of objective sensory science methods when research has shown consumers respond to small, almost undetectable changes to pack design in an unexpected way. Adapt to a service-based world. Hopefully what we've demonstrated is that sensory is bigger than flavors and fragrances and bigger than packaging design. It's about experiences. We are moving into a world where experience is everything, and the companies that succeed are ones delivering the best relationships and the best experiences, and those who aren't are likely to fail. And whilst we can be confident that in food and beverage industry, the physicality of food and drink are not going to be turned from product to service, the experience around them and the enablers, such as Amazon Grocery and Uber Eats, will be more service-based and thus changing consumers' behaviors, perceptions, and expectations. So yes, there'll always be a place for physical product in the food and drink industry, and there will always be roles for packaging around authenticity, branding, and labeling, yet more and more of these are being enhanced by digital and data services, and companies need to adapt their relationships and experiences to reflect this. And finally, utilize feasible technology solutions to capture true parameters so you can design for who consumers really are. Human perception is complicated. It relies on many different sensations and personal preferences and is too complex for people alone to just study the data and spot patterns. This is where AI really has the advantage. With enough data, AI can cluster different groups of consumer preference and link that with other data, be it visual, sound, chemical, or maybe even strength, so that you can start to unpick the reasons behind those different perceptions and how to therefore target products according to different consumer needs. As attitudes to technology are changing across the board, smart tech, sensors, data science, etc., can all help not only increase the speed and level of consumer understanding, but also help brand owners get much closer to their consumers and as a result, grow brand loyalty. So what's next? We feel these three principles are key as there are new categories emerging all the time. Some aren't replacing old ones, they're genuinely new categories. So while I can't talk about the specifics, we're working on a new combination technology, so device and formulation, where there is a multi-sensory experience delivered by a device. And we are having to work very closely with consumers to develop new sensory protocols and parameterize that. In order for this to succeed, the device and formulation have to fully harmonize in order to deliver that experience. So what's next? It's fundamentally about understanding how data science and consumers can complement traditional sensory research to help optimize that relationship, that experience, and ultimately brand loyalty between users and their products. As we have all mentioned, our aim has not been to focus exclusively on food science and technology, but to work collaboratively with sensory science agencies to help engineer new understanding and consumer experiences. One of the real privileges of working across so many market sectors is the opportunity to cross-fertilize technologies, insights, materials, and business models. And our perspective of sensory has been built from gathering stimulus from other categories and industries, where the constant is those human needs, perceptions, and behaviors. So we hope that some of the things we've talked through might have sparked new trains of thought or even new ideas for research approaches, product experiences, or business models that you can continue to explore through the lenses of your own interest areas. Please do feel free to reach out to us if you'd like to learn more about what we have shared today. I'd like to take this opportunity to really thank you all for listening and for the IFST for enabling us to participate in today's webinar. And for now, I'll hand back to Natasha, who will guide us through the Q&A.
Thank you all for such fascinating, informative presentations. Great visuals too. We're now moving on to today's Q&A session. So just a reminder, you can submit questions using the Q&A function, which should be at the bottom of your screen. So, Alison, given the theme of your presentation has been around putting the sensor into sensory, I'd like to start with a data science focus. What are the main benefits and barriers you foresee with AI and data science going forward?
I think one of the main benefits is going to be the ability to quantify, at least to some extent, some of the subjective parts of sensory experience, which will allow people to develop products in a slightly more focused way. So, for example, if you take the concept of refreshing, there's no easy way to specify that. The parameters are going to depend on what the product is, whether it's ice cream or whether it's a carbonated drink. So it's very difficult to focus how you develop a product. Now I can use sensors to quantify the parameters such as color, taste, number of bubbles, and say a fizzy drink. But it's relating those parameters back to the human perception of refreshing, which is very complicated. And that's where I think AI is going to come into its own, because there's too many parameters for a human to really comprehend, and there's too much sort of ill-definedness around the solution to just look at it. And that's where AI is really great at teasing out maybe clusters, correlations, relationships to try and really break down the problem. And hopefully at some point you'll be able to say, I want a refreshing drink aimed at this sort of set of people. These are the parameters you need to go away and work on to make a product to do that. I think the barrier is likely to be actually just perception of AI. So people have a tendency to think that AI is perfect or magic, and it really isn't. It's really vital that before you even dive into AI, you understand what the problem is, what the data is. So first of all, you'd need people that really understand sensory panels and consumer surveys, what the benefits and limitations of those are, how people are maybe affected in their judgments. Because if you feed bad data into AI, you tend to end up with really bad results out. So I think there's also a lot of human insights you need to get first. So instead of just sort of throwing data at something, you're really feeding it with the right problem. And if you do that, you can get some fantastic results, and you'll get some really interesting insights, which you wouldn't have otherwise found. What you do with those insights is, again, a human problem. If you want to then translate them into something for the consumer or a new business opportunity, you kind of need a human to look at that and decide what to do.
Excellent, thank you. Martha, many of us work in categories that move quite slowly and rely on refresh and maintenance activities. Hearing Alison's views on AI advances and the importance of still having human translation to elicit much of the value, can you share some more insights into how data can be translated into action?
Absolutely. So the key word I'd highlight in your question there, Natasha, is action. So what is the action you're actually trying to achieve? You know, what does success look like through this translation into action? So we've supported both kind of breakthrough initiatives, which aim to kind of disrupt a market, as well as more incremental innovation, where maybe the aim is to be more, category maintenance. So both of which essentially are trying to manage a degree of risk. But as I've demonstrated, no two innovation challenges are the same, and therefore you require sort of a different toolkit in order to, as Alison was mentioning, really elicit the right data and to uncover the right insights. And then it's really key to then have that multidisciplinary team to really be able to make those connections to then, find that meaningful action. So you mentioned specifically there how to focus on more sort of incremental activities. So in this specific category, we've actually worked in many sort of FMCG categories, which are enabling kind of, they're more established by baseline sensory norms. So things like juices, dressings, snackings. And now these baseline norms may have been driven by strategic initiatives, or many of them may have been enforced by new regulations coming into the category. So, we've seen a rise of things like no added salt or sugar reduction in the snacking space. And it can be really challenging for some of these billion-dollar brands to balance that innovation with their sort of signature sensory experience. Because many of these sensory norms have been weaved into the experience actually associated with these heritage brands themselves. So working with and having sensory panels as part of that innovation toolkit is really valuable here when you're talking about those more incremental kind of activities. But we've also seen like a surge of startups since the millennium, which maybe are unconstrained by some of these category norms, and they work in a very agile and kind of test and learn environment, which can be challenging for quite a lot of big corporations given kind of budget and time constraints in place. So again, it's really important to have the right toolkit and the right human skill set to really be able to translate the data that you're gathering and the insights into something that's meaningful for your corporation and for your category. And just to close the loop there, you mentioned around sort of incremental but also breakthrough innovation opportunities. So if you're really talking about, if your action is to do something more disruptive, it's to do something more breakthrough, then you really do need to look broader to establish what is that sensory protocol, because it might not actually exist yet. So take the example of the spreads lid that I walked us through. In that context, it's a very cost-sensitive, disposable food product which needs to be mass manufactured and then available at a competitive price point. So understanding consumers' perception of premium within that context is really key for you then to actually be able to create what that premium signature needs to be, and then actually translate that into the packaging and actually into the formulation as well. So at the end of the day, as we've mentioned, experiences are everything to consumers. So to kind of, sum up that answer, I guess, when you're talking about action, what type of experience are you trying to achieve through those meaningful translations and those meaningful connections, and being mindful of that all the way from when you're gathering that data input, as well as then actually how you're going to translate it. I hope that answers your question.
Certainly it does. Thank you, Martha. So Ben, your colleagues have spoken about how we can use a combination of data science and research toolkits to create new products. What are your thoughts on how the food sector might enhance their activation?
Thanks. Yeah, great question. I mean, with the advent of digital and e-commerce and mass customization, there are huge opportunities to redefine traditional business models. We talked a bit about this sort of transition from product to a lot of the relationships and services that sits around that. Right now, home delivery, grocery services, and some snacking categories are flying, while some of the things align more to quick service food and drinks are down for obvious reasons. But most of the questions come back to understanding the consumer. What are they trying to achieve in their daily lives, and the context, and also the sort of established mental constructs and biases. When we all approach an innovation challenge, as specialists, we do so from this sort of deep subject matter expertise perspective. It's our job, whether our lens is design or chemistry or engineering. But it's easy to forget that consumers don't see the world through these lenses. Their decision making is driven by emotional or cultural or contextual constructs, and these things could break our value propositions, no matter how well we've sort of formed them technically. And this is one of the reasons why we have anthropologists and psychologists on our research and strategy team. I routinely hear respondents saying things like glass packaging is more environmentally friendly than plastic, but it just isn't as simple as that. Glass may be recyclable, but it has drawbacks. It breaks, it costs more to ship because it's heavier, it's expensive to recycle because of the temperatures involved in reheating and reforming. The energy involved in recycling plastic can be many times more than plastic in terms of global warming gases released. Take a context like packaging used in the airline industry. I mean, when all that stuff comes off an aircraft, it's incinerated. And so, as designers, you need to design into the fact that that is the life cycle that stuff is going to go through, and think about the gases that are going to be released when that food and that packaging is incinerated. Another example, we're seeing bamboo toothbrush handles starting to emerge into the market. And, on the face of it, that may seem more sustainable. But if bamboo toothbrushes end up in the trash, as they typically do in Western markets, that isn't much more environmentally friendly than plastic ones, because they decompose and release greenhouse gases. So, in the Western world, if a toothbrush plastic handle goes into landfill, it's not ideal, but at least the carbon is locked. But actually, in wider context, more than half the world's ocean plastic enters the ocean from just 5 countries in Southeast Asia. So, in the context of the regional high chance of plastics ending up in the water, actually a bamboo handle in that context, in that part of the world, might be actually a much better solution. Powered toothbrushes again introduce another sort of carbon equation into the mix, although of course the much smaller consumable heads are of course a benefit. And I mean, the point I'm trying to make is that it's very rare that any of our innovation challenges are one dimensional. And I think this really highlights the need to work together as multidisciplinary teams to ensure that we're sort of factoring in this full life cycle analysis, trying to understand the consumer's constructs and norms and overlay those so that we can create really robust value propositions and messaging and ultimately the sort of business models that are going to underpin those next successful breakthrough experiences.
Great, that's really clear. Thank you. Martha, I wonder if you'd take this one. So do you think we'll see 3D printed foods of any food types, or specific questions around supplements to meet individual specific needs?
Yeah, thank you, Natasha. I've been tracking 3D printing for a while as a potential trend, and building on from Alison's examples of personalization, it definitely seemed an exciting technology that was, becoming more and more accessible, and there was talk about having 3D printers in people's homes. But I think we've seen more of a shift from products focusing on function to emotion. And I think when it comes to 3D printing, I think it largely asks the question of why. Sort of what is the additional benefit that me 3D printing something for myself in my home is actually going to provide me? And I think we've actually seen, because we've seen a shift, particularly in the supplements market, for example, on products actually taking more of an approach around that emotional benefit that it's providing consumers. I do wonder if actually 3D printing isn't going to launch more into mainstream because of the way that we've adapted our messaging within sort of say the supplements. You can get supplements if you're a woman, if you're an athlete, if you're pregnant, if you're going through menopause, if there's such a spectrum of emotional support that you can gain through almost mass customization, that the level of personalization that 3D printing could provide, I wonder if it's maybe if it's not really come into its own. So I mean, I don't have a silver ball, I can't say for sure, but from the trends that I've seen and the changing in consumer perception and preferences, I'm not sure if it will actually, come into something as we maybe thought it would have done 3 or 4 years ago.
Okay, thanks. Alison, do you use reaction time methodology while measuring consumer reactions, or do you believe this is implicit?
I must admit, I'm not entirely sure what reaction time methodology is. We certainly measure reaction time with all those sensors, and it's really interesting to see how some people just pick something up and immediately sort of do it within a few seconds, and other people take their time and open everything very slowly. So we can certainly measure that. But yeah, obviously it depends on the application as to how relevant that is. Often you care about how well people have done something rather than how quickly.
Great, okay. Thanks for that. And Ben, we've got a couple of questions linked with cost. So is AI technology affordable and easy to operate? And what's the typical investment cost for developing a sensor and its associated algorithm? The example they use is the inhaler.
Yeah, good questions. I mean, I think the answer, as always, is what are you trying to achieve? What does success look like? I mean, is AI affordable? I mean, arguably it's kind of free right now, in the sense that you can generate vast data sets, for no cost. I mean, your phone is generating data sets, whether you like it or not, all of the time. We carry these things around with us all the time. Many of us will have the GPS location enables, giving intimate detail on where we are and in the world and what we're doing. The question, as always, is how do you interpret that? And the challenge in relation to the the data service, the research and insight service, is how you take that data set, which may be days or even weeks of field trial, and then correlate that to insights. And the one critical part of the process, although we didn't go into it in much detail, is actually the lab prototyping activity. Once you've understood what you want to measure, you've created the sensor suite, you then take it in the lab and start creating various scenarios so that actually you know what you're able to look for when that comes, when that data set comes back in, so you're able to correlate what you're seeing to the events that happen. I mean, Alison, you might want to come in here and talk about the sort of free aspect of AI.
I think it's certainly become more accessible. Things like, being able to just rent time on a cloud rather than build your own supercomputer. I think from the technical point of view, the tools which are now available, so you don't need someone who can code it all by hand. You can get someone who can concentrate on understanding the problem of the data, and you can buy some off-the-shelf software packages to really guide you through applying AI and get some really good results without maybe the level of deep technical sort of coding ability you needed sort of 5 years ago, or the amount of hardware. But I think you still always kind of need someone who knows what they're doing, but it certainly brings the cost really right down. And I guess that for certainly things like image recognition, anything image-based, there's now lots of open source, very powerful CNN, so neural networks, that allow you to classify images or get data out of images, which you can pretty much just pick off the shelf and start using and just run with it.
Okay, that's really good, succinct answer. Thanks for both coming in on that one. So maybe I could start with you, Ben, and if you could ask one of your colleagues if you think it's more appropriate for them. Is there a difference in how you approach projects in low involvement versus high involvement categories?
Well, I think I interpret that to mean the sort of very emotional sort of loyal categories versus the ones that the consumers don't think about. And I think the way I'd answer that question is that we approach much of our work in a solution agnostic way. And what I mean by that is the fact that we try not to go in with preconceived ideas about loyalty and brand equities. We try and go in and try and understand what consumers are trying to achieve. We use typically a jobs to be done approach, and you will have heard us talk about functional, emotional, and social categories of need. And we try and approach those things sort of independently, so we can then understand how to create specifications and solutions around that. And the reason that's so powerful is it's a very sort of good platform, if you like, for innovation. And I think one of the things that's changing these days, as we see, startups rapidly growing from, someone's bedroom to billion-dollar brands in just a few years, in every category, whether that's digital, whether it's food and drink, and these big acquisitions going on by a lot of the traditional corporates, is that consumers are becoming less loyal, more skeptical, and their allegiance, if you like, to brands is less powerful than their allegiance to finding a great experience that solves their problem. And so, there isn't maybe the old allegiance, and the options aren't as limited as they used to be. And I think people are open-minded about buying their products and services from companies that are just a few years old, and that presents all sorts of innovation challenges wherever you sit in that market sector and product landscape.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for applying all your examples, and all of you actually, to large and small operations, because that's really where IFST come in, trying to support everybody across the sector. So we've got quite a theme running, as you'd probably expect, about, dare I say, the new normal and how we can manage more home use testing, because traditional classic testing is more difficult with regard to social distancing, having to disinfect equipment and so on. So perhaps, Martha, you could kick that one off.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks, Natasha. So I think we've all sort of had to adapt our ways of working, and particularly sort of user testing in this sort of difficult environment at the moment. But I think something that we've particularly seen, that there's been a shift in the way that testing can be conducted. And while I'm not saying that classic sensory testing doesn't have a role, I think the way that it can be conducted can potentially be seen to maybe be more informed, or maybe be more supported by kind of more of a technology route. But I think specifically in the sense of moving from maybe more the sensory labs to going to in-home testing. We're definitely seeing that, you know, ourselves have been moving a lot of our consumer research and product testing and sort of shipping, you know, products out to consumers in their homes. So I do think that, again, it is an efficient way, and I do think it's sort of the way that maybe is going to become the new normal. So as we're developing these techniques and these ways, it's, you know, it's considering what enablers are out there that we can really leverage. And I think we've seen a rapid sort of evolution, whereas you'd usually sort of see an acceptability curve, you know, maybe take kind of 2 or 3 years with some of these platforms. You know, we've seen a rapid, you know, kind of move to online and more e-commerce and sort of platforms and enabling and testing in other ways. So I don't see that it would be much different for our sensory panel testing, but it's being mindful with what we're trying to achieve with that particular test and making sure that we can protect the nuance of that to deliver sort of what those insights that we need. Ben, do you have anything to add? Because I know that, you know, it's a topic that we've discussed a lot, so you might have a point to make there.
Yeah, I think just reinforcing your point, you know, we've had to evolve as many research agencies are, and you know, usability testing is a big part of our human factors offer, and we're now routinely sending test kits out. You know, using headsets, sending a test kit, a parcel out that's got a headset to mount a mobile phone in. We're moderating, you know, discussions with consumers. We're, you know, giving instructions for how to stay safe. We're sending hygiene kits out so that everything can be sanitized, you know, before, during, and after those activities. So we're all having to evolve, right? I think, you know, many of us are probably using technologies in the last 2 or 3 months that we might not have ever engaged with before, or certainly not at the level of you know, the amount of time we're spending on some of these technologies.
Thanks, Ben. So I'm conscious of time, and I just wondered if any of you had any burning questions that you'd spotted on the Q&A that you'd just like to jump in.
I think that there's a lovely one here about humans. Someone said, for food and bev, would you say that humans still give the best measure of acceptability of a product? I think, you know, that's a golden nugget of a question. And you know, at the end of the day, what are we all here for? You know, we're here to create market-leading product experiences, you know, whatever product category we're working in. At the end of the day, if we don't deliver that, then we're not going to be successful. You know, this is the reason we turn up to work. It's the reason we do what we do, investing years of our lives in R&D programs. And yes, ultimately, I think humans are. But, you know, hopefully the key theme or message that you've taken away through this discussion is the importance of us all working together as sensory panelists, as food scientists, as designers, technologists, and engineers. Because unless we're working together to create those class-leading multi-sensory solutions, we're going to risk missing out an important part of that jigsaw.
Perfect. Nice ending. Thank you all so much. Thank you to everyone from across the globe for attending today's webinar. If you didn't manage to answer your questions, please contact the speakers directly. Their details will come up. Finally, we'd like to remind those of you not familiar with IFST, you can find useful resources on our website, including our brand new COVID-19 Knowledge Hub and also our online FS&T magazine. We really do welcome new members, so please check our membership benefits page on our website. I'd like to finally say thank you and goodbye.